The American stake is enormous, and I would urge that Americans should quit thinking of Asian development as a threat to America, but to work out a partnership, especially through technology and financial integration, for furthering not only American economic gain, but for world prosperity as a whole.
Our topic, as you know, this evening is Asian development and America's stake in it. Our panel is made up of three very distinguished Asians. Dr. Anwar Nasution is an instructor of economics at the University of Indonesia, where he received his doctorate degree. He also holds a MPA from Harvard University and a PhD in economics from Tufts. He's published several works, largely in the field of monetary policy and financial institutions of Indonesia. He's also worked with several international organizations, including the World Bank. Dr. Swamy holds a PhD in economics from Harvard. He's taught at Harvard, most recently, I believe, last year. He did some early work with Mr. Samuelson, who's known to almost everyone from their first economics course. And he's published in the American Economic Review with Professor Samuelson. He's also the author of Economic Growth in China and India, 1952 to 1970, a comparative appraisal, which was published by the University of Chicago Press. He's written in several fields, in mathematical economics and econometric studies. His reputation is genuinely global. He's also been active in Indonesian politics. He served for 11 years in the parliament. He also was instrumental in the early renewal of relations between India and China. He presently is chairman of Hindustan Systems Consultants in Bombay. As is the case with his colleagues on the panel, he brings not only economic training and political participation, but practical experience to this evening's session. Mr. Hui is currently Chief Representative of the National Economic System Reform Institute of China, an impressive think tank, if I may use the term, if it's appropriate, I think it is, which is large in size and gives advice to the highest councils of Chinese government. His research concerns the strategy and policy making for China's economic and political reforms and the impact of China's reforms on world politics and economics. He too has written several books and is a student of the Chinese economy. Last year, he was at the Woodrow Wilson Institute. This year, this current academic year, he'll be with the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington. We really do thank the Asian Society for bringing these three very distinguished gentlemen to our presence this evening. They'll each talk for approximately 10 minutes, at which time the floor will be open for questions. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you this evening.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor to be here in Baltimore and before such a distinguished audience. I've talked with my other two colleagues on how to proceed, so I'll speak in general terms about the framework under which America should recognize its stake in Asian development. And then my other colleagues will give their own perspectives within that. Amid the news of gloom that you get every day, particularly from Latin America and even Europe, Asia is one area which has produced a number of success stories about which you hear very little, except when you discuss Japanese automobiles in America. But Asia, as we recognize it, is in three parts. There is the area called newly industrialized countries, NICs, which consists largely of the Pacific Rim countries, such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and of course Japan and South Korea. Then you have an area called ASEAN, which consists of 4 countries: the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And finally, an area which is known as SAARC, S-A-A-R-C, newly formed, which stands for South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation, which consists of the 7 countries of South Asia, which means India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. So this constitutes Asia, and if you add up the population of all these countries, that's half the world. And so in this half of the world, there are a number of success stories which need to be recognized. In fact, the growth rate tabulations indeed bring this out very clearly. Between 1982 and 85, the world as a whole grew at 2.7% per year in GDP. The industrialized countries grew even less at 2.6% per year. But Asia grew at 4.7% per year, with countries of the newly industrialized countries such as Hong Kong, Korea, and Singapore and Taiwan growing between 6 to 7% per year. The ASEAN countries grew at somewhere between 5 and 5.5% per year. And even South Asian countries grew between 4 to 5% per year. Even Bangladesh, considered the classic international basket case, grew at 3% per year. So indeed, in addition to these Asian countries, there is of course the giant China, which is in a category by itself, which has also grown tremendously since 1978. Some of the popular images that you had about Asia, which is typified by the image India had, for example, of a country constantly begging for food from the United States, not being able to stand on its own feet. Today is a food self-sufficient country, and in fact is exporting food. It has, of course, democracy and has already produced the 3rd largest scientific manpower pool of the world after the United States and the Soviet Union. It is this success in which I think America's continuing stake is enormous for 4 reasons. First is ideological. Nothing has demonstrated the power of the free enterprise system and shamed the socialist world as the performance of these Asian countries. In fact, this message that the market economy is in fact the superior performer has dawned on many countries, and particularly on China, about which Mr. Hervé Lin will speak. Maybe he will speak in more diplomatic language than I will. And even in countries of Africa, where recently Prime Minister Mugabe of Zimbabwe said that whatever may be his ideology, but ultimately he has to go to the West for money and technology. America has a great stake in continuing this, and in fact in inducing further deepening of its ideological beliefs. If indeed America, in support of Asia, can not only continue this success and enforce this, enhance this success, but in fact induce democracy, as it has contributed to in Philippines, then I think indeed you will not have to fight a Vietnam War in order to demonstrate the power of freedom. This is indeed a silent revolution about which very little has been written. The second aspect of the American stake is economic. The largest markets of the world today exist in Asia. And with the rise of computers, global finance has become a reality. In fact, statistics show that countries of Asia are taking US direct investment at the rate of 20% per year. And in fact, the demand for finance from Asian countries, including Japan, is quite significant. Every day in American television, you hear about the American deficit in the balance of payments, but few recognize that the money that for Asian countries siphon off in the export-import trade, ultimately gets reinvested in the United States. So this indeed is one very important aspect, which this interacting aspect of America with Asia needs to be recognized. Asia has produced a pool of professionals who are migrating to America and in fact have established themselves in the high-tech area within the United States. In fact, I have done a study for the World Bank which shows that the fertility rates which have declined in the United States would have caused tremendous gap in professionals in America, but for the fact that Asian professional pools were available. That is, there was migration of scientists and engineers from Asia to fill that gap. And it has been estimated that indeed, if this migration had not taken place, America would have been a great disadvantage in high-tech areas. Third is the possibility for America of joint ventures. That indeed, United States, with its capital and high-tech, could combine with highly skilled, low-paid labor of these Asian countries and go to third countries to export American products and indeed benefit from the cost cutting that would be made possible. So there are tremendous economic stakes available for the United States. Third is the cultural aspect. America is already a mosaic, and it's a Pacific country as well as a country looking towards Europe. There are all communities of Asia present in America, and it is necessary for America to maintain contacts with Asia to keep this mosaic vibrant and solid. So the cultural aspects also is not to be overlooked. And finally, I would say there is the security aspect. The economic miracle has already frustrated, as nothing else has, the domino theory from working. In the 60s, you heard about how American soldiers had to die in Vietnam so that the communism would not spread to the whole of Asia. But today, without a single American soldier dying, you are witnessing the failure of the domino theory. In fact, each Asian country has become much stronger than ever before. It is to be recognized in the American context that long-run Soviet expansion can be only stopped by Asian countries. In fact, two of the most prominent countries are China and India, whose combined population is 40% of the world. So indeed, from these four angles is the broad framework within which America's stake is to be evaluated. The American stake is enormous, and I would urge that Americans should quit thinking of Asian development as a threat to America, but to work out a partnership, especially through technology and financial integration, for furthering not only American economic gain, but for world prosperity as a whole. Thank you.
I'm also delighted to be here to meet such distinguished audience. I come from Indonesia, and I'm asked to discuss what are your stakes in our affairs. What are your stakes in our developments? I think there are many interests of the United States in this region. First, of course, because as Mr. Swami said, we are the ASEAN, including Indonesia, control strategic crossroads between Pacific and Indian Ocean, and between Asia and Australia continent. And as a matter of fact, 2 of your military bases are located in our region. Second, the region is quite rich in natural resources. You know very well that nearly all of the world production of rubber, palm oil, tin, copper, coffee, oil are coming from this region. The third point is also, as Dr. Swami said, ideological. You know very well that all of us in ASEAN countries are non-communist countries. As a matter of fact, Indonesia crushed, I use the word crush, the biggest communist party outside the communist bloc back in 1965 without outside help. No single American soldier fallen on our land, and not a single penny received from anywhere, including the United States, for that purpose. The same was true with the Philippines, with the peaceful revolution at the beginning of this year. And the fourth aspect, the record of our economic progress since the last 2 decades shows that we, people in Asia, can use your aid and your economic assistance more effectively than people in other regions. People in Latin America than people in Africa. Economic progress in our region has made great contribution to the welfare of the world, including creation of market for U.S. economy, because we buy a lot of high-techs from the United States. We buy a lot of capital goods from the United States, because we buy a lot of agricultural products from the United States, such as cotton, such as soybeans. You see, we cannot live without tempeh or soybean cake. That's the main menu of our population. So, in conclusion, I think I urge you, American friend, to think about our region, not to be occupied with the problems, general problems, for example, in Latin America, for example, in Africa. We are grateful for your aid, and all we need now is to ask help to preserve our economic progress, to preserve our democracy, and don't think that our economy is main competitor of yours. Not at all. We are totally different from, let's say, Japan. We are not great power like Japan, so you don't categorize us as a Japanese. I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to have chance to speak in Baltimore My specific topic is China's economic reform and opening policy and its impact on the economic cooperation with the U.S. As to the economic cooperation with China, the conditions are very different from the other countries. As you know, China was closed for about 30 years. So when we talk about the economic relations with the U.S., we have to refer to the reform and opening policy in China. Since 1978, China has been greatly changed because of the economic system reform and the opening policy. It is very significant not only to the China's development, but also to the world economy, especially to the Western economy. Here I would like briefly to introduce the reform and its open policy. From the point of view of development, the economic reform refers to a great shift of development strategy from extensive development to intensive development. That is to say, the growth through technological innovation, increasing factory productivity, better quality goods, and better services. As an important part of this reform, the investment sector was to undergo fundamental change in regard to the level of allocation of invest, decentralization in the management of investment projects, and the development of several new sources of investment financing. The budget will finance not only by the budget process, but also we will use the other finance from the world. Some scholars estimate to the end of this century, China will use for about $30 billion from the abroad. It is about the total amount, about 10% of the total amount investment in China. So it is very important for us to attract foreign investment, including commercial credit. Because the key feeder of China's current development strategy is the attempt to increase the role of technological innovation and productivity increases as sources of growth, increase the reliance on imports of technology and capital goods is important, and it is an obviously objective of the open door policy. Thus, Chinese needs a great amount of foreign exchange. How to get such amount of foreign exchange? There are two ways in general. One is to expand our export. The other is to attract foreign investment and foreign loans. The basic way to increase export is to adopt a correct strategy that meets the demands of international markets. To this end, we have to cooperate with the foreign companies, foreign banks, and foreign enterprises so as to raise the quality of export commodities and gradually build a system of sales promotions and a serious network abroad. have established several special economic zones opening up to the Western countries. And we have also 14 cities in the coastal area as opening city. We are encouraging the foreign businessmen come to China, and there are lots of places waiting for them. In my opinion, it is very important to increase the tie with the United States. There are many areas for us to cooperate to search new markets in the world in order to realize our mutual benefits. Since 1979 to the end of 1985, the volume of direct foreign investment in contracts signed between the Chinese and foreign investors is totally US dollar 16.2 billion, of which 4.6 billion are actually invested. There are over 2,500 Chinese foreign joint ventures, Chinese foreign cooperative enterprises, and exclusively foreign investment. Arrangements are now being made to set up 3,800 similar enterprises. Most of the enterprises which have gone into operation see good performance, make satisfactory economic results, and the partners of both sides have gained profits. It is true that there are some inconvenience in running factory in China because it has different conditions. But most foreign investors agree that China is a potential market, and the wages, rents, services fees are relatively low. But some foreign investors now complain that investing in China feels disappointed at the high costs. They complain the low process of adopting detailed laws and regulations governing this investment. They complain the cost of negotiation establishing offices in China. They complain labor discipline. They complain the availability of foreign exchange. This problem actually exists seriously. In order to keep the attractive to overseas investors, the cost of production must be kept low enough to make foreign investors competitive in the international market. Because of China's insufficient foreign exchange revenue and a long repayment capacity, foreign investors all face the problems of permitting their dividends out of China. Now Chinese government pay more attention to solve this problem. China may grant special preferential treatment with regard to wages, land rents, and various other changes to those foreign investors who export their products to other countries. The aim is to make such foreign investment in China more competitive than elsewhere in the world. This is a very important strategy for us to attract foreign investment. This would also apply to foreign investors who sell their products in China but reinvest in their profits in this country, or spend them buying Chinese goods to export. So long as both sides can find a reasonable solution to the foreign exchange problem on the basis of equality and mutual benefits, foreign investors may enjoy bright prospects in China. That is, they will be able to expand cooperation with China By making full use of the favorable condition here, the vast market, the large labor force, and the competitive low prices. On our side, we could absorb foreign capitals in a bolder manner. As to vast market, although the petrochemical industry is regarded as a sunset industry in the developed countries, but it is still a sunrise industry in China and has great potential for expansion. I think there are lots of industry like this in China. Recently, Deng Xiaoping answered questions to an American correspondent about the difficulties for foreign investors in China, such as too many taxes and high labor costs. Deng Xiaoping said, foreign investment was something new to China, and mistakes were unavoidable. He said, we are working to change the present state of affairs. And he said, I do understand these complaints of foreign investors. No one will come here and invest without getting returns on their investment. We are taking effective measures to solve these problems, and I am confident that the profit of the cooperation with the U.S. is very bright. Thank you.
Gentlemen, we thank you for your introductory comments. The floor will be open for questions until 7:15. I'll ask you to stand when you ask your questions, and additionally, I'm going to repeat the question. Yes, sir.
For Mr. Swami, I'm interested in the comment you made concerning the documentary. If there is a validity to it, today we're looking at South Vietnam, communistic, Cambodia, just being torn apart, eaten alive, Laos, the same, Thailand on the border, then jumping afield a little bit, Afghanistan, fighting for its life. I was very delighted to hear that India can now feed herself and export. I sincerely hope you're helping with some exports too to Afghanistan. You had Bangladesh, just as you used to have Pakistan, the whole bundle. Bangladesh is still a basket case. I don't really see where there's been an interaction, but maybe there is. I'd like to hear about it. And to help them, Pakistan, two of you still are loggerheads. I would like to have your comments on this, in view of the fact that you dismissed the domino theory as not true.
The question, I believe, is to comment upon instability in your region of the world, upon the domino theory, and some of the complexities of the situation.
Well, first of all, let me say that these countries which you mentioned as being communist are already communist at the time the United States was in Vietnam. Cambodia was what it was, Laos was what it is today, and the only new country to become communist after the American pullout was South Vietnam, which is now integrated into the whole of Vietnam. The Cambodian thing up till 1971 was not, but the American pullout took place in 1974. And by then, it had already come under the influence of the leftist forces, which progressively went into the hands of the Pol Pot and then ultimately into Heng Samrin. So there was no the advance of communism has stopped after that, and Thailand today doesn't require any assistance from America to stave off communism. It's true that Afghanistan is a new factor, but it's also true that there was a country of about of a billion people which used to talk about exporting revolution, and today is talking about cooperation with the United States. That's also a new development. And the second thing is that the demonstration effect of the market system is so strong that India, which used to pride itself as being a socialist country, socialist democracy, today is going in for a great deal of liberalization. The Chinese have also, which was considered as once upon a time a model for the third world of centralized planning, today is going in for a market system. And there is indeed all along the way a recognition that it is indeed the market system which is efficient. And there is pressure in every country to adopt it. That's another gain. And finally, when you come to India, the Indian area, there has been now a new body formed called the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation. This means all the countries, which includes India and Pakistan. They have begun to meet. In fact, in November in India, in the city of Bangalore, all the heads of government of these 7 countries of South Asia are meeting together to discuss ways to trade amongst themselves. I myself have just come after paying a visit to Pakistan, where the central issue between India and Pakistan is not as to whether we're fighting over Kashmir, but whether the Pakistanis will allow us to trade privately 200 commodities or 250 commodities. We are talking different language altogether. So there has been a fundamental change from where you talked about the countries falling one after the other to a situation where not only that is not happening, but the ideological commitment to communism measured in terms of totally centralized planning and 100% ownership or near 100% ownership of the means of production by the government, giving away to a market orientation and allowing people freedom to make money. China, they are now saying there's nothing wrong with making money. And that indeed, I think, is the biggest revolution of the 80s.
Yes, sir. The question is for Dr. Nasution, and it is that the questioner would like to have the opinion of Dr. Nasution about the future price of oil, OPEC's impact upon it, and he bases the question upon Indonesia, of course, being an oil-producing member of OPEC.
Thank you. You know very well that Indonesia is moderate member of OPEC. We are small producers. In my opinion, OPEC is over. It's over. No more OPEC. Why, if you look at the map of oil producers all around the world, see, not only OPEC, including United Kingdom, for example. Everybody in every country is in a bit safe, you see, and they need money now for many reasons. Indonesia need money for development. Libya need money to finance revolution all over the world. Iraq and Iran need money to pay their war. Mexico need money to pay the debt to the United States. The same holds with everybody. You see. So in my opinion, we cannot afford to reduce the production to increase the price. If you look at the demand side, I don't think that even though we lower the price, which is low now, jack up your consumption. No more. So in my opinion, again, it's over. No more oil, no more good days.
Yes, sir, in the rear of the room.
Now, all three of you gentlemen have alluded to the interest that America has in cooperating with the industrialization of Asia. And I think most Americans are of the opinion that it's a far better situation for the United States to be dealing with countries that are on more or less equal footing. Our industrialized countries can produce things that we need, can consume things that we can produce. But when you get down to specifics, when you speak in terms of American cooperation, it's almost always in terms of finance. That is to say, American capital leaving America, going to Asia.
Sure.
Now, what are the prospects for economic integration?
Well, yes, yes, go ahead.
The question is for Dr. Swamy, and it is, first of all, the question made the observation that most American aid takes the form of financial aid. And the question is, what are the chances for economic integration between the United States and Asia?
First of all, I would like to point out to you that American aid is a very, very small fraction. I'm talking about it. Okay, it's capital transfer that you're worried about. In fact, I would say that what needs to happen is not American capital transfer, but American involvement in portfolio investment, which means that the money would be periodically returned through payment of dividends and royalties and so on. And indeed, I will tell you that according to the latest publication of the World Bank, these Asian countries have the best rates of return on investment. And indeed, if you did a country risk analysis, you will find that the Asian countries have the least, as the technical word goes, least standard deviation in terms of the returns. So I think the integration can be in a number of levels. First of all, American participation in equity financing, or particularly through portfolios. Second, as you may have seen in today's supplement of the Wall Street Journal, the reality of global finance has finally been established. And indeed, America is in a position to provide funds for direct investment through various mutual funds, through a whole variety of other methods to Asia. So this is one level. The second level is most of these countries are already in a position to absorb America's best products. India, for example, may have a low per capita income, but it is today negotiating for supercomputers with the United States. And some of your corporations would have gone bankrupt but for the fact of India's demand. If any of you have any connection with control data, you can find out that if it weren't for India's order, control data would have folded up. So indeed, these countries have demand for technologies now at a pretty sophisticated level. And finally, I would say that Americans and selected Asian countries can in fact engage in joint ventures in which you can get tremendous cost advantage. I would say, for example, if American cars were produced in some of the Asian countries, maybe you can beat the Japanese at their own game. It's a possibility that it needs to be examined. So indeed, the availability of technical skills in Asia with very low wage rates, and the American availability, American capacity to supply technology, and the global nature of the financing that's emerged, I think the integration will take place in these directions.
Yes, sir.
One of you mentioned that there was a brain drain from the Asian countries. To our advantage, a significantly large number of technological experts are leaving Asian countries to come to the United States. And it's fortunate, according to your comments, that that's occurring. However, my concern is, what impact does that have on the Asian countries? Don't you need these experts to help with your own development?
The question is, and I believe directed to Dr. Swamy, but any of the panelists can respond certainly, doesn't the brain drain from Asia referred to earlier in fact hurt the Asian countries?
I think different from country to country. Take the case of Indonesia, for example. I think the best aid of United States to our country is education. After we educated United States, you see, we never stay longer here. We never seek employment. We back to our country and then you develop the country.
Well, expanding on what he said, it is a fact that, for example, large numbers of Indian professionals, either educated in India or educated in the United States, choose to stay here and occupy very important positions in all areas. In fact, when President Nixon had his cancer operation, one of the doctors was an Indian. If you go to Houston and see the Dr. Cooley's heart transplant, you'll find large numbers of Indians. I think the final operation is performed by an American, but all along the way, the Indians prepared the way, so to speak. Now, do we lose? In my opinion, no, not yet, for two reasons. First of all, we are producing a surplus that we can't employ in our own country. Secondly, those Indians who go abroad maintain very strong links with India. In fact, we have found in the last 5 years that while the World Bank aid to India has been declining, a group of Indians emerged whom we call as non-resident Indians, who have made it good in the West. In fact, the Indian community has the highest per capita income for any ethnic community in this country. This group of Indians are now putting their savings back in India and helping Indian development. We also find that many of the Indian professionals here go during the summer vacation to India and help set up certain of our institutions if we can't do it ourselves. For example, in the city of Madras, we have today one of the most modern hospitals in Asia because of the fact that doctors who are practicing in the United States take 3 months off and go to India and have helped in the transfer of equipment and have trained people and set up private hospitals which are today functioning extremely well. In fact, they are functioning so well that all the Arab sheikhs are coming to India because they find it cheaper to go there than to the United States. So there is a two-way transfer here. It's not a total loss. It is true that perhaps if Indian economy continues to grow the way it's going or accelerates in its growth, that maybe 10, 15 years from now, we might begin to feel the pinch. But then if the conditions of work in India improve and the demand for the skilled labor goes up, I will say most of them would choose to stay in India or return. And it's already, the phenomenon is there. I myself have returned. I know large numbers of people around me did return. And this process is now beginning to increase. And you'll find that over a period of time that the market itself will correct for that.
Mr. Israel?
Talking about joint ventures and the great advantage companies would gain by using $2 an hour labor instead of $10 an hour labor. If they continue with these joint ventures and all the labor is done in Penang or in wherever, Grass, what do you think? What effect do you think that will have on American unemployment?
The question is if indeed Asian labor is inexpensive and there are a substantial number of joint ventures, what impact will that have on American unemployment?
Thank you.
Dr. Swamy, I see passed that question on. That's good comment.
First of all, I'll answer this question. In my opinion, there are two different kinds of industry. One is in advanced or high technology. The other is not so high technology. For instance, the steel, petrochemical, and the other industry. There are lots of this kind of industry. For this industry, I think if you pay too high wages, you cannot have the competitive in the world, in the international market. You cannot get money. But if you invest in the developing countries, I think you can get money back, and you can develop yourself. You can develop the high technology industry. So you can resolve your problem about the employee. This is my opinion.
Well, just make this bring it into even sharper focus. I will say that if this joint venture was not there, you would still be having workers being laid off because of, as he mentioned, the losing competitive position of the United States in these traditional industries.
The far left of the room. The situation described is that when American high-tech companies go abroad, instead of having free rein, they usually are subject to licensing provisions or co-production provisions. And this, in effect, drastically limits the profits of the American firm. Would you please comment on that?
Well, these are, in fact, the examples of co-production that I know of, for example, a country like India, and I'm sure this is true for most Asian countries. The technology is already 5-6 years old at least before it is even considered by the United States for transfer. And therefore, I don't see with the rate at which high technology is growing, the Americans would be never in such a great disadvantage that they do the research, they spend the money, and then somebody else reaps the benefit, because indeed the American government, the American business are very shrewd, intelligent people. They know where the money is and how to maximize their returns. And I have not seen a case where Americans on a philanthropic basis have transferred technology. Of course, there are countries to which you are indulgent, and I would say South Korea and Japan. The gain was not that you transferred high technology to them, but the gain was that you gave them such liberal access to your markets. That, I think, the Americans have realized is not going to be done for anybody else. And so ultimately the decision between the Americans and the client country would be based on mutual interest, and co-production will in no way detract from America's advantage in high tech.
Yes, sir.
There's a two-part question. One, do you use gold to back your money, the three countries, or silver? The other question is, I have a little bit of background on imports, and I just cannot understand, with your cost of production, and walk into a department store or any store and see ticket shock. I see something that costs you in your country 50 cents to make, and it appears in an American store at $10 to $12, $15. And this I cannot understand.
There are two questions. One, do you back your currencies with gold and silver? The second question is, why do you mark your goods up so much?
Let me pick up the first question. I don't think not so many currencies of the world backed by either silver or gold nowadays. So including our currency, not Indonesia, not India, nor China, nor even United States, I believe.
Yes, even second question. Well, first of all, I think there is a transportation cost which needs to be added. And I would say that many of the problems we have for Indian exports to this country is not so much the price. The problem is really the quota restrictions that are put on it. And I think the price at which it is sold here is not in the control of the Indian exporters. you should address this to other American businessmen and ask them why they charge such high prices.
Yes, sir, in the center. Would you gentlemen comment upon the problems of population growth and whether family planning is indeed important in your countries?
This is an incentive question. But in China, we have our traditional culture and we have our own condition. It is very important for us to develop our economy. But because we have too many people, too large population, as you know, in the end of 90s, there's a very serious disaster in China. For about 20 million people died in starve. These are very terrible figures. So because we have such experience, we suffered such experience, so we make our mind to control our population.
That if the present rate of growth of the population of India continues and the present rate of growth of the population of China continues, then by the year 2020 we will overtake them in population size and will become the largest, most populated country of the world. And it's very hard in a country like India to suddenly tell people not to have children or have very few children, because there is nothing for the people in their old age. If we are to bring in a social security system, then it would be enormously expensive matter. However, as development takes place, the birth rates have been coming down. When we became independent, our birth rates were 50 per thousand. Today it is 35 per thousand. But the unfortunate part is that death rates, which were 40 per thousand, is down to 15 per thousand. So the death rates have come down much faster than the birth rates. And but if we can accelerate our development, then I think in India you would find the birth rates would also come down even faster than they are coming down. And that's the way I think we can manage the problem. Of course, there's another way to manage it too. If countries like Australia and many countries of Latin America and even the United States had a much easier immigration law, then we can export some of our population.
We thank our panelists for marvelously